I'm just going to wait a minute while people come in, but we will kick off. I'm here today with Ecologiq's Leanne Griffin, who's our Senior Program Manager, and Kieron, Treasurer from MTM. Welcome to our third session. Firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to the Kulin Nation as the custodians of the land that we are operating on. As you'll know, if you've been to our sessions before, each week we're looking at a different recycled material, and this week we're talking about recycled ballast. This session will run as it does every week for 30 minutes, with 10 minutes included in that 30 minutes for the questions. We finish about 1 o'clock. We're recording the session, so you can access those on the Ecologiq knowledge share, and they should be available Monday. If you don't have access to the knowledge share, our address will pop up at the end. It is ecologiq@roadprojects.vic.gov.au. Thank you for joining us, and I'll hand over to Leanne and she can have a chat with Kieron.
Thanks, Cheryl. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session. And hi, Kieron. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, not a problem. Thanks for having me.
All right. So I want to begin today. If you could just explain a little bit about yourself and your background, and also a little bit about MTM.
Sure. So my name is Kieron, Treasurer. I'm the Environment and Sustainability lead for infrastructure at Metro Trains. My prior experience was with an environmental consultancy called Prensa. I've moved across to Metro Trains. I've been with them now for about 3.5 years in this current role. Yeah.
Great. And what kind of work does MTM do, or Metro Trains do, for those who may not be as aware of the rail network?
Sure. So as a company, we're people movers. So obviously we run the Melbourne train network, but us in the infrastructure division, we look after the existing assets. So it's maintenance and just making sure everything runs as it should.
Great, thanks. So obviously we're here today to talk about recycled ballast. So can you explain a little bit about what that actually means?
Sure. So the whole idea behind the recycled ballast works is it started off, we try to find a better way, I guess, to deal with ballast. When I first started at Metro, we were sending a lot of it to landfill. So this project actually has evolved over time. So initially we just wanted to find a better, bypass landfill and find a waste receptor that could assist and accept the material. And then over time we realized, look, we're probably onto a good thing here. We just saw stockpiles upon stockpiles of clean material sitting there, and we thought, look, let's just get this tested and see if it meets, Australian standards, and let's see if it's a viable product and if it can be used in other applications.
So it's true that ballast is reused already, like in terms of virgin ballast is reused in parts of the network, but it's just not reused, hasn't been reused as ballast again. Is that correct?
As in the recycled ballast? No. So the recycled ballast is not in the infrastructure space. We've had 2 projects, so CTD, so Caulfield to Dandenong, and the Seaford level crossings have used recycled ballast, or ballast that's been pulled out during track renewal works and plugged back in for trial purposes. But this project, so we've not yet gotten it to the point where we've plugged it back into mainline, not just yet.
Yeah, okay, that's great. So the process for getting the recycled ballast back into the network, can you just help break down that process a little bit, like a little bit more step by step of what's required?
Sure. So for us to be able to do that, it's got to meet the Australian standards, and it's also got to meet MTM's internal ballast specifications. And what we did last year was basically prove that we ran the numbers. And when I say we, it's myself and Jacob Griffin from the Infrastructure Advisory Group. We've basically put the ballast through trial and error and make sure that it ticks all the boxes. And what we've done is shown that multiple times through multiple tests that it does do so. So now we're just in the final stages working with Ecologiq to put together a fact sheet, basically summarizing all the works that we've done in the space over the past few years, just to summarize exactly what standards it meets, what specifications it meets. Once we've got that fact sheet compiled, we're going to place that into the Ecologiq reference guide, and that's going to be communicated to different teams, different projects, infrastructure, and hopefully that's when we'll see the ball rolling and we'll have the product then used in the main line. Yeah.
That's great. So for those who haven't had a chance to see what a recycled ballast product looks like, what is it? How is it different to the virgin product?
It's a good question. It's probably not going to be different. If we had to go, let's say, for a field trip out to a company that we do a lot of work with currently, is repurpose it. If we had to go out there and place a virgin stockpile against or next to a stockpile of recycled material after processing, it would be quite hard to tell the difference between the two. And that's basically what kicked off these works really is when we were on site at Repurpose It, looking to team up with them for them to take our ballast. That's really what sparked this investigation. Is we said, look, this looks like a viable product. You know, it's still, even though it's been used and pulled out of the corridor, it still looks to hold its properties, angularity. It still looked fine. So, from purely a visual perspective, I'd be impressed if someone could really judge the difference between a virgin stockpile and a processed or recycled ballast stockpile.
And the testing that's done, obviously, is to verify that it meets all the standards and specifications that already exist for ballast. That's correct, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. So we've been doing testing since, I want to say 2018, end of 2018. So that's coming up on 3 years now, and that's all compiled in multiple different. So infrastructure advisory groups got documents on this or studies on this. We've also got the consultancy that does the contaminant testing and geotech testing for us. It's ADE Consulting. So there's multiple documents that have sort of captured all this information. So it's the challenge for us now is really to take all that information, like I said before, and just if we can put that into an A4 sheet and summarize it and make it really easy to communicate, and for a layman like myself to pick up and go, yep, I understand exactly what this product is, where it comes from, and how it can be used, what applications can be used in. That's where we're at now. So we've got our fact sheet in draft currently, and we're hoping to have that completed before the end of the year.
So the next step is really that people just start using the recycled ballast.
Yeah, definitely. I think it sits on us in terms of communicating that. I think using forums like this and leaning on Ecologiq for info hub, reference guide, the fact sheet format, that sort of stuff. It is a really great opportunity to sell and really get the word out, instead of us having done all of this work and it's sitting in an archive on a hard drive somewhere, and have someone one day go, oh, this work has been done. It's really about, look, the work's been done. Now it's about not selling it so much as really just pushing out the comms on it and making sure people do understand, look, this is a viable product. It's comparable to virgin materials. It's cost effective. It's really just about making sure people understand those points and then understanding what applications this material can be used in. So it's not just mainline corridor use that we're pushing for. It can also be used in landscaping. It can be crushed into an aggregate. So I think our initial focus was really, we had the blinkers on and we were really just pushing for mainline use. But we really want people to understand that there's probably about 5 or 6 different applications, and about 4 of those are good to go right now. It's really mainline use is the cherry on top. It is really the end game. And we're hoping, I couldn't put a date on, but next year will be the year where we really make, I guess, a hard push for that. But in the meantime, I think it's important for people to understand you can use this product in multiple other applications.
So obviously, the recycled ballast, going back into recycled ballast is a really good circular economy outcome. Yeah. But what are the other main benefits of using recycled ballast?
That's a good question. So I think it's important for people to understand that ballast, virgin ballast at least, is a finite resource. So it's good for us, and we started these works before things like the Recycle First policy came online. We started looking at these works. So I think it's great that we did the hard yards before the Recycle First policy came online. Now that it is online, there is a good incentive for your teams like infrastructure, your projects, and all the alliances to really start taking this a bit more seriously with the implementation of recycled products for their works. It just, yeah, again, it just incentivizes it. I've actually forgotten what your question was, Leanne. What the benefit is?
Benefit of using the recycled.
Yeah, no stress. It's again, it meets the Australian standards, meets all the internal MTM specifications. So it's good. Yeah, it forms that circular economy, like you said. People do need to understand that, you know, we're working with finite resources now. So it's about being a bit more creative and not just, you know, sending a viable product like ballast, like what we were doing previously with sending it to landfill. It's really about finding those opportunities, doing the hard yards, getting the testing done, quantifying all that information, and then presenting it again in forums like this, and making sure people understand, look, you've got a viable product here that's comparable to a virgin material. So, you know, let's stop leaning on the virgin materials. And to that point, with the virgin material, the basalt quarries are actually starting to run a bit low, and RTOs are starting to lean on materials such as Hornfels ballast, which is, in terms of properties and speaking to track engineers, is not as good as what we've got in the corridor as it stands, which is a basalt material. And that's another huge sort of selling point for this recycled material, is that it's a basalt for the most part. From what we've seen from all the testing, it's a basalt versus what's being pulled out of the quarries now, which is a Hornfels, which is, I don't want to say inferior material, but it's not as good as the basaltic ballast. It's a mouthful. Yeah.
So when the ballast is taken off site and it does go and get processed, what actually happens in the processing? What does that look like?
Sure. So to run you from start to finish, what it looks like, this has become almost a BAU exercise for us. So what we'll do is we'll engage the company I mentioned before, ADE, or any environmental consultancy. We just lean on ADE quite a bit. They'll conduct testing for us, so a soil classification analysis wherever we're going to be doing our track renewal work. So let's say, for example, it's a Camberwell station. We'll get an idea of what level of contamination that is. For the most part, what we find is it's usually a Cat C, Cat D material. So that's obviously a reportable priority waste. We then engage a suitably qualified waste transporter to move that material to a, again, suitably licensed, EPA licensed facility. For the most part, we lean on companies like Repurpose It and Cleanaway to accept that material. And what they'll do is they'll process that material on site. And what that means is they basically remove the contaminants and the fines from the material. They grade it for us, and then they'll stockpile it. And then it just depends, what do we want to use that material for, and what do other sort of companies, it's not just us and Repurpose It, obviously, multiple other contractors and businesses can approach them and purchase that material for reuse. But in this space, we're really trying to just make people understand what it can be used for back in the corridor. So track formation, drainage, landscaping, etc.
Yeah. And the important thing again is that it meets, this is not an inferior product that we're talking about. It meets the specification, the testing, all of the kind of results so far have proven that this, once it comes out of that processing, that it is a quality product.
Absolutely. So when we ran all the numbers last year, we did a lot of the heavy lifting, Jacob and myself. We basically tabulated what the Australian standards were. We then had a column for virgin material and then a column for recycled material, and it ticked all the exact same boxes. So you're working with a comparable material that, again, ticks all the boxes for your circular economy, your recycle first policies, and the like. It's not an inferior product, and we've got all the data in the world to show that. And again, the challenge is going to be just placing that all on a fact sheet and making sure people can see it. You know, it's good to go, basically.
That's great. We've got a few questions that have come in, but I'll just ask one more before we kind of go over to those questions. So what would be your advice to any project teams or contractors who are now wanting to look at and use recycled ballast? What should they consider? What are the next steps for them? What's your advice in going down this path?
Sure. I'd say in the first instance, if there's any queries, you know, while we're still working on the fact sheet and working to get that into the reference guide and onto the Ecologiq info hub. If there's any queries, you know, burning sort of hot questions that need to be answered in the first instance and immediately, you know, you can reach out directly to either myself or Jacob Craven, or myself, and I can put you in touch with Jacob, and we can run through that information together. Anything that we've not sort of covered in this conversation, we'd be happy to show our data and have conversations outside of this and offline, and just show you all the workings through that we've done. And yeah, we've got, all the information is there. It's just about, I guess, just showing it. So and also just keep pursuing it. If there's anything you know, outside of this ballast exercise, if there's people doing similar sort of works, just keep going, just keep pushing, keep pursuing whatever it is. And if you just want to reach out and then just pick our brains for advice on how to sort of get something like this, similar to this, across the line, we'll be happy to have that conversation too. Yeah.
Great, thanks. All right, well, there's a couple of questions here. So I think a few of them we have covered, but I will ask them anyway. So what in the testing and analysis that's been done, what is specifically looked at? I know that we talked about the contamination before, but from a health and safety and environmental perspective, is there any ongoing chemical testing required to use the recycled ballast?
Chemical testing requirement. We just work at anything in relation to the contaminant side of things. We just work against the EPA regs. So as long as, you know, when we do the testing prior to removal, that's against the EPA regs. And then once the material's clean processed, we basically testing to make sure there's no contaminated fines left on the material once it's stockpiled and ready for reuse. That's basically what we do. So that's where we bring in the EPA regs. That's where they're used. That's what we're working against there. Yeah. So it's basically taking a contaminated material, removing the contaminants, and having, you know, basically a full material that's ready to go.
Yeah. And so when you have been doing this work, what are the kind of more common questions that people tend to have around the health and safety of using ballast?
I think it's more perceptions. You know, there's preconceived ideas that because it's a recycled material, it's going to be inferior. So things like the angularity and some of the properties haven't fallen away, which is completely understandable, because the whole idea, I guess, with ballast is the reason why it's replaced is because it does lose its properties, I guess, over time. But what we do during the processing is we get rid of the material that's inferior, I guess, and we keep this superior is not the right. We keep the material that meets the standards and specifications, if that makes sense. So during that grading and processing the material, we get rid of the material that we don't want. We keep that, again, that really great A-grade, I dare say, material.
Yep. And Kieron, you mentioned before that the MTM specifications are at a potentially higher level than the Australian standards around the ballast or using the recycled ballast. So can you explain what that means a little bit? Like, what is it particularly that you're looking for? Sure.
So when we did a comparison between the MTM spec, this was last year, against the Australian standard, we noticed that some of the numbers in the MTM spec were out of line and actually a bit harder to hit. And this was something that we raised internally with the track engineers, and just advised them that, look, there's differences here, and we just basically asked the question as to why. The explanation obviously was you'd want I guess a higher level of safety. You're moving people around the network, but us raising that or flagging it with that team, really their response was to put the MTM ballast spec more in line with the Australian standard, if that makes sense. So to basically just bring it back to the same level, if that makes sense, which is great for us. And in doing so, they then made, we now have referenced the recycling ballast or recycled ballast in the MTM specification, whereas previously it wasn't. So it was a two bird, one stone situation, which is great for us.
Yeah. And do you foresee that, what would be the main barriers that people might encounter or are likely to come up if they're wanting to use recycled ballast?
Again, I think perception. I think in the first instance, I think a lot of people have it in their mind that, look, this is a recycled product, it's going to be inferior. You know, before even looking at any form of data or having any form of conversation, there's really those preconceived walls that we've noticed is a challenge, and something that we're still, you know, even though we're years in the making with these works, it's something that we still find we come up against. So really be prepared for answering or I guess, answering those preconceived ideas, and really just you have to be adamant and really let the data speak for itself. You know, we've not cooked the books or made up numbers. It's multiple times we've proven that this, you know, it'll meet the Australian standard. It meets the MTM ballast spec, and we just really want people to understand that that's the case. And again, it doesn't have to be just used in mainline corridor applications. It can be used in lower risk applications, or what we call lower risk applications. So your sidings, your shoulder top-ups, no issue. That's completely agreed upon across all the different areas that we've spoken with. There's no issue with that. So there's multiple applications for the material. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Kieron. So I might bring Cheryl back in, and we can kind of work through the rest of the questions that we are getting in. We're getting a bit of chat, which is really quite nice to see. But just before we do, Kieron, is there any kind of final thoughts that you have that you wanted to share before we kind of jump into a few more of the questions?
Just keep at it. If there's anyone in the crowd that's working on any projects, any recycled products that they're trying to get across the line, just be adamant. Again, you're going to come across, it's not just ballast where we see that preconceived idea of recycled materials being inferior. You're going to see that across the board. So if you're facing those challenges, just keep going and team up with someone. I've got Jake Craven to lean on, and the infrastructure advisory group for technical advice. I'm just a layman at the end of the day, and he's really the guru, and I pick his brain for getting works like this across the line. So yeah, just keep at it, honestly.
Great, thanks, Kieron. Cheryl.
I think so. We've covered the first one. You've talked about the steps involved in recycling the ballast, and Bo is asking when the fact sheet will be available and the complying standards be available.
Yeah, so with that one, Bo, just give us a little bit more time. We're just finalising the fact sheet at the moment, but I understand that the complying standards are available. They are. That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So where would, if people want to find this, the updated standard and specification, where would they need to go to find that, Kieron?
That you can find listed in the MTM ballast specification. I cannot think of the document number off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure the document is just called the MTM ballast specification. That lists the Australian standards that we want virgin ballast to meet, and obviously recycled ballast to meet. Yeah, it'll all be listed in that one document.
Great. Did we cover, is the volumes? Is there an indication of the volumes, what the volumes will be over time with recycled ballast?
Well, that's a good question. I couldn't give you a precise answer off the top of my head, Cheryl. It's basically whatever we pull out in any given lease year, or what we call it. Yeah, I guess lease year is fine to use. If we pull out 10,000, 20,000 tons of material, and let's say 80% of that is recovered, we've then got 8,000 tons of material that can be processed and reused. So I can give a more definitive number. We have captured that previously. I just cannot recall off the top of my head what that one is. So maybe it's one question we can come back to offline.
And I guess the more you do, the more you'll have available, won't you, down the track?
Exactly. So we're not slowing down with our track renewals works anytime soon. So as long as we keep doing that, we'll have a recycled material that we can lean on.
All right, great. If you can come back to us, we'll share that.
Well,
Kieron, just that one actually relates to another question that was put in the chat. And this might be a bit more of a hypothetical one, but I think it's still good. There's a concern, I guess, in the current timing in terms of the processing. So it's saying, it takes 2 weeks to get processed for it to come back. Sure. So what do you foresee that there will be able to have stockpiles of recycled ballast that can be available for use on mainline, and what would it take to get there?
Sure, I think that's a good question. I think if you look at, again, I'll repurpose it as an example. They have, stockpiles upon stockpiles sitting at their site. So if we, let's say, for example, this weekend started using those stockpiles and started plugging it in, again, hypothetically, it would take quite some time. And I couldn't give a definitive timeline on how long it would take to chew through those stockpiles. But like we said in the previous question, is as long as we continue our track renewals works, we're going to be topping up those existing stockpiles. So it's going to be almost like a perfect circular economy situation there, where it's ballast in, ballast out, one's feeding one, and those stockpiles technically shouldn't be chewed through, let's say, over a 12-month period. It doesn't make sense that would be the case. As long as works continue as they do, then I can't see a situation where, unless No, honestly, I couldn't think of a situation where it would just run out, overnight or within a 6-month period. Yeah.
So that the stock up, like the product is available now for use.
Products available. Yeah. No, that's
Okay,
right.
great.
So all the testing that we've done is on existing stockpiles, how to repurpose it and everything.
Yeah.
When ballast has been used for a while, Mohammed's asking, when ballast has been used for a while, the gradation will change. So probably it will lose some specific size in that gradation. Do we need to fill those size gaps with fresh product?
That's a good question. Look, when the material is processed and it is graded, there's different size stockpiles that you can find on site. And the inferior, the smaller products, the products that do lose their properties over time, will be graded out of the existing stockpile. So, look, I wouldn't draw a line through the idea of using some form of virgin material with the recycled material. A combination of the two is probably better than not using it at all, if that makes sense. So if we do find to fill the gaps in the use of the recycled material, yeah, it's still a better option than completely relying on a virgin material, if that makes sense. I'd rather a combination of the two than just a virgin material. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And how does ballast contamination get dealt with and treated? May have covered this earlier on.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that was the first thing we ran through.
Yeah, I think we did cover that one. We do have.
Did we talk about the MTM spec? We've got
Yeah.
Yep. We've put that's aligned. Sorry. Let's see what else. The buy recycled directory referenced in SV website, is that being used to list suppliers of process? I think SV are doing a fair bit. You may be able to add to this, Kieron, but SV are doing a bit of an upgrade on their site. So they may have suppliers, but Ecologiq also have a supplier map. So if you don't have access to the Ecologiq knowledge share, once again, just email us at ecologiq@roadprojects.vic.gov.au and we can give you access to that. So the supply map covers a lot of products, but so SV are in the process of updating. So down the track, they may have that information.
Awesome.
It's actually one of the things that we're starting to look at the moment as well at Ecologiq is we know that there is a couple of facilities that do process recycled ballast. We're really keen to look at more facilities, so especially to service regional projects. So it's something that we're actively looking at in our industry works as well. So that there will be more opportunity to use recycled ballast into the future.
Yeah, that's correct. There's more facilities coming online. I think with something like the Recycle First policy, I think it is making the recycled space a bit more competitive. So you've got facilities like Solve. I'm not sure if that's one that's on your map, Leanne. Solve in Altona. That sits with Enviro Pacific.
Yes, yeah.
Clean Waste coming online too, out in Ravenhall. And then Alex Fraser don't accept any reportable priority waste materials just yet. I think they're working on a license to receive that. Something that we'll probably need to confirm. But what we're seeing is more facilities come online across the map, which is grand, Yeah.
Have we covered off all the questions in the chat?
We've got one more, Cheryl, which I actually don't know the answer to, and Kieron, you might. Do any other states or any other jurisdictions recycle ballast, or is this a Victorian first, or is Victoria an Australian first?
That's a good question. We've definitely cited, I think, New South Wales and I think Queensland, but I cannot remember for the life of me if they've actually started using the recycled material. I know that they do a similar sort of process with cleaning and stockpiling, but don't quote me on this. It might be one of the ones that we might have to come back to. I think when we were looking at the studies and sort of just doing the back end sort of work, I remember seeing something about New South Wales and Queensland, but I couldn't recite it off the top of my head. We can confirm that afterwards, no issue.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kieron. So just to wrap up our ballast discussion before we hand back to Cheryl in terms of talking about next week. So I suppose my main takeaways have been, Kieron, that we've got recycled ballast is available now. It meets standards and specification. There is product available. There are suppliers available. It's just about getting it into the ground, whether people want to do that under trial conditions or they want to do some kind of validation, or it meets standards and specs, so it is available now. So it's really just about encouraging people to get out there and start using recycled ballast.
That's a great summary, Leanne. Yeah, you've nailed it. That's exactly it. Yeah, it's ready to go.
And if people have questions, they can obviously go to yourself. They can ask MTM. It's obviously under the MTM specification, or they can come to Ecologiq and we can help support, because obviously we want to try and get as much recycled ballast into the system as possible.
Exactly.
That was great. Thank you very much. If we've missed anything in the questions, we'll go over them after the session and just make sure we've covered everything off. I think probably the best way to get Kieron's email, if you don't just chase down MTM, is to give us a call or email us and we can sort that out. I'm just going to pop this screen up now. So next week, it's been a great session today, and as always, lots of information. So yeah, happy to answer anything further. Next week, we're actually talking to John Esnoff of Department of Transport. He has extensive experience in the use of crumbed rubber in roads, both in spray seal and in emerging uses. So he is a wealth of knowledge. So feel free to join us again next week for that session. And as I said, any questions, anything else, happy for you to follow us up on Ecologiq at roadprojects.vic.gov.au. And thank you so much for everyone attending. And thanks to Kieron and Leanne for a good session. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Everyone. And I just noticed that the ballast supply specification, a link was put into the chat. So for those who haven't had a chance to have a look at the link in the chat.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.